Create Your Life with Franz Sydney. Hello everyone, welcome to Create, the special show that is all about mindfulness, feeling good, feeling great, and avoiding the procrastination and anxiety, the overwhelm. That is all about being calm, being in control. And today, which is episode 39, we are talking about how to avoid all this madness and overwhelm when somebody dies, when somebody passes away. The last thing we want is to add to the grief the sensation that we're losing track of what's going on, because we have no idea of what the departed one wanted us to do. So for this, we have a special guest from North Carolina, and her name is Judy Butler. Hello, Judy.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing great, enjoying this wonderful sunny day. And thinking about your wonderful TED Talk, which was really inspiring for me, thinking about all the peace that we can have when we know that even if we suffer, when somebody goes away, go to the other side of the veil, but then we know that everything is happening as it's supposed to be, then we can really just focus on the sacred occasion to say goodbye to this person, knowing that all has been done properly. So this is quite a serious topic. But how did you come to be so interested in this topic? Tell us a little bit of a background story.
Oh, thank you for asking that. A little bit about that is my father was diagnosed with dementia. And so we began that part of a journey and caregiving. My mother was the primary caregiver and I was the secondary caregiver. But through the process of working with my dad and my mother, I came to the realization that all the things that we encountered, I didn't have answers for. I was very overwhelmed, just like you said about, we need to figure out how to work through our procrastination and our overwhelm. And I decided, I was overwhelmed, I was stressed, I was physically fatigued, I was worn out. And so by the time my father passed away in December of 2018, I personally was $35,000 poorer for having to hire caregivers and attorneys, and for also just, working through the whole process. I got to my father's casket at the service and I wasn't even able to cry that day. There was just so much involved. So I decided, being the me that I am, that there needs to be a better way. There needs to be a better method, a different service, a different structure of being able to work through things before we get to that point, so that we end up at a place where we're able to grieve in a healthy way. So I created the Guardian's Gift. It is in memory and in honor of my father. So that's a little bit that's just a very small fraction.
Yes, and I'm sure we're going to find out more. So mentally, of course this podcast is about how we feel, with our mind, how we can make it to feel better. What was the main symptom you were experiencing when everything was happening and you had to do everything?
Well, there was a lot of confusion because there's so much information on the internet. You can Google or look up anything. And of course, there are as many opinions and ways to do something as there are sites that come up when you Google something. So, and a lot of it is conflicting information. But it was just so overwhelming. I'd have a question, so I'd go to the internet and I'd look it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, it talks about wills, it talks about trusts, it talks about all the legal and medical. My first career was in the hospital for 35 years. So I actually have a medical background as well. But it's just overwhelming to understand about dementia or whatever aging health conditions one of our loved ones has. But then what do you do with that? What are the best choices? Do you keep them at home? Do they go into a nursing home or a retirement village? What are the best choices? But then how are you going to pay for that? Because a lot of people in the world think, well, the government will pay for it, or social services agency will help pay for it. And People are very unaware of what these things cost. They're extremely expensive. And so it was a lot of that. But as a pastor, as an ordained pastor, and as a psychotherapist, the mental and emotional piece, even that I wasn't prepared for, because we don't talk about grief. We don't talk about death and dying. People tell me all the time they're not afraid to die, but they are afraid of the dying process. And they're afraid of that part of pain and what's that going to be like. But we also don't consider what it's going to be like for our family members once we're gone. And so it's about making decisions and choices as early as possible and preparing for the end of life rather than waiting and saying, I heard someone say yesterday, oh, my family will figure that out once I'm gone. And I'm like, oh, but that's such a burden. Why do you want to do that to your family? So that's a little bit about that part.
That's a great thing, even if you think, well, they will know. If you have more than one child, and there will be discussions about what you assume, etc. And they can be quite grievous. You were talking in our pre-podcast chat about loss of peace, sleepless nights, thinking about all this stuff, a little bit of anxiety. So that's why it is good to think ahead, because as I was quoting you last week, when we fail to plan, we are planning to fail. That's a logical consequence, isn't it? So we can't plan for everything in our life. What can I do if I get cancer? Well, good luck. We cannot just do that. But it's important to know that if something happens, if we have something there that is prepared, we do have that peace of mind. That is so important, especially now. We need that peace of mind because we live in times that are so confusing and there are so many restrictions and problems and fear. The last thing we want is to make life even more complicated by adding an additional layer of confusion and not knowing what to do, when it's actually quite simple to start making this process easy. Perhaps not even at 80, we could start at 60, at 50, because we can die a lot earlier nowadays. There are accidents, there are diseases, and some people die of COVID, some people die of a vaccine from COVID, some people die, they come out of a house and a brick falls, and it's just so easy to just disappear, and so much struggle for the family to then think, what would this person want me to do now? So that's so grateful for me to think, wow, you've been really planning this because you want to celebrate the memories of these people as well. Tell me a little bit more. You told me about these wonderful interviews that you hold with a person that eventually will pass away, and you hold them when they are fine and in good health. What happens exactly? That really caught my curiosity.
One of the things that's interesting when someone passes away, it's not about the money or the stuff that they own. Family members tell me all the time, adult children say, I wish I knew more about my mom or dad, or I wish I knew the stories. Because families may hear the stories when they're growing up, but they either don't remember them or they fade away. So one of the things that I like to do with families is I actually begin at the beginning. I ask, where are you born? Well, where did you go to school? What was your favorite plaything or playmate? What did you like to play? And we talk about all the stories of their life. And I actually collect those stories in a certain fashion. There's a process. And we actually document the stories. I ask them to get their report cards or their diplomas or all the different things that are important to document the stories, so that once they pass, the family has that. I actually hire a professional videographer when somebody works with me one-on-one, and we actually sit down and do a videographed information interview where that person can share their wisdom, they can share their pain, their sorrows, the mistakes they made, the things they wish they'd done differently. And so it's very important to have that, because once that person passes, and as you said, we don't know what age or when, and anybody can go at any time these days, it seems like. It's important to have those stories.
Mm-hmm. It is brilliant to record them. And as I was mentioning last week, this happened to us. We had an elderly friend called Brenda, and she was, normal health. She had a normal chronic illness as you have when you're, in your 80s, but nothing major. But one day I felt prompted to bring a recorder, and I think I used just my iPhone, to be honest. And I asked her a lot of questions because I saw a website when we were doing interviews for legacy purposes. And I recorded all these questions about how she was born, how she lived during the war, what her beliefs were, and everything. And what would you like to leave as a message to her family, to her grandchildren? She had so many great-grandchildren. And she was saying so many, really, she was sharing pearls of wisdom, let's say. It was amazing to listen to her. She was so full of grace, right? Graceful, right?
Uh-huh.
And I just love that she has this kind of beautiful purity about her way of talking and about how she viewed life. And we recorded it, and then I did a little bit of editing, and I saved it. And a few months later, not very long later, she became very, very ill with kidney cancer, and she died. And there was a funeral, and I had the opportunity to be in touch with her own children, and I passed her this MP3 file, and I said, this is the interview of your mom. And it was such a priceless thing to have, because although we talked to her, they were very loving people, they are very close, but just to ask all these questions, to have something for the grandchildren to listen to in the years to come, I think is a priceless gift to hear the voice of our beloved ones afterwards. So I'm really glad that you had this wonderful idea, and it makes you have so much purpose.
Oh, it does
as well,
Yeah.
So that's great. Let's move on. What happens? You were talking to me about some statistics, and you told me that about 40% of people die without having left a will. That's quite a thing, 40% of people. What do you think? It's a mental, a psychotherapist, so you can talk. What is a mental block that makes me think, no, I don't want to do a will? Why not?
Actually, it's more of a superstition. People think that if they talk about death and dying, they're going to make it happen. That just by talking about it, it's sort of some sort of voodoo or hex or bad karma or something.
Manifesting.
Yes, it's going to manifest and I'm going to die. When in actuality, being able to discuss it removes that stigma and removes that fear in a lot of cases, because we don't know what happens afterwards. So we actually have an opportunity to talk about it out loud and to hear what our fears are, if they're founded or unfounded. And like I said, most people talk about, well, I'm not afraid of the actual death. I'm not afraid to be dead because I don't know that part. But it's that dying piece. And so, again, people are very afraid of talking about it because they think they will actually manifest it and create it.
And death is associated with pain somehow, but statistically the majority of people die in bed and in their own bed, so we should never go to bed just in case.
That's true.
Logically, I'm one for data, so they shouldn't do. So what would be your suggestion? What should people do if they say, right, Judy was right, Franz was saying correctly, like, I want to conquer this, I want to make sure that I am prepared, so I will have this peace of mind. What should the steps be for people to be organized so that some things are out of the way and they don't have to worry later?
Right. Well, of course, I do have a process and a service that I would love for people to partake or join in, and called the Guardian's Gift. And we have a step-by-step process where we actually collect the stories, we ask the questions, and have someone guide them. We actually guide them through the process. They talk to a real person. It's not something they have to do on their own, because it's important to have the feedback when you discuss these items, these topics with others, that somebody can say, well, I have that same thought, or that's curious. Let's see what we can find out. For people who are really, really nervous and really do have an honest phobia about this, find a therapist, find a counselor, find a pastor or someone who is a professional that can actually help. Because what happens a lot of times, friends, is that people want to talk about it and their family members don't. People tell me all the time, a mom or a dad will say, I'd like to discuss this with my children, their adult children, and they don't want to talk about it. Or the adult children will say, this is something we need to discuss with mom or dad, but they won't talk to us about it. They're so private. And, at the end of the day, there's really not a lot to be private about. I understand the privacy thing because I'm very, very obviously concerned about confidentiality. But, to talk about these things with your family, it really opens up a place of honesty. It opens up a place of peace, because once you can get it kind of off of your chest and make sure that everything is organized and ordered, it brings such peace of mind.
It is. And that's what the podcast is about. It's about feeling good and knowing that we are doing what we can to keep this mental health nice, and to keep a positive attitude, especially in the moment when we lose someone, where we have all the pain. Why should we add even more to all the problems? Let me just very quickly check if there is something that we have not talked about, because it was so good. You talk about the overwhelm of procrastination. That's one of the things, procrastination. We tend to procrastinate things that we know we have to do, but they're a little bit painful and a little bit uncomfortable, and so we just do it. I'm gonna do it later, and then when it does happen, the event happens, it's too late, because it will I wish we'd done that. And is there a connection there with your interest? You have such a huge interest in family history, DNA test and all this. Is there a connection there with your passion?
Oh, there is. I love genealogy. That is my hobby. I enjoy it so much. I like traveling around to cemeteries and looking at tombstones. I like doing the research. I've been doing this for a really long time, probably 25 years. And one of the things that connects me is my father and I would do it together when he was alive. And we would go find the places that he grew up. And I would take pictures of those places where he talks about, we lived in that house, or we have family in this cemetery. So I'm a very big proponent of genealogy, and that's part of the way this is set up. The Guardian's Gift is set up is through collecting the genealogical pieces that are important later. I know when I was doing some genealogy research, I would find something, a will or a court document, and I would get so excited because there was the documentation that I was talking about, that somebody took the time to actually write the stuff down. And I was like, oh, this makes it real. So I encourage people, absolutely 100%. If you've not done your research or your family history, please do that. It's so important. Because my grandchildren come and say, who was this, and what was this person, and what was it like? And I told my grandchildren, who are teenagers, I said, one day there will come a day when somebody's going to look at you and say, well, way back when you were a kid. And I said, and you're going to go, wait a minute, what do you mean way back when? But it will happen, and it's important for you to have the stories.
That's beautiful. And stories are really what our legacy is about. We remember the funny stories that happened to our grandparents, because they repeated the story over and over. But then I'm there talking to my brother and say, what was the story about grandma saying that? And he goes, no, it wasn't like that. It was, oh yeah, I forgot. So it's so important to just nail down those little details. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about connection as well, isn't it? Having the family connected all the way back to the great-grandparents. And now you done your DNA test, and you found out that you are actually from England mostly, right?
Yes, I am 97% from England.
That's amazing. And you're in North Carolina. Well, there we go. See?
Yeah.
So how beautiful to know then that you have a little bit of history about your ancestors. There is something called indexing that you can do on familysearch.org.
Right.
And you can index, you can find the documents of all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, as I mentioned this last week, my grandparents, excuse me, in the 50s, 1956, they moved to Brazil, to Sao Paulo do Brazil. And they emigrated. As you know, they went through the Canary Island from Italy, and then they had this huge boat, and they went with the white clothes and all the white handkerchiefs, and they went to Sao Paulo do Brazil. I don't know exactly all the details. I have to ask my remaining relatives because I have so many missing bits. And then they stayed there 7 years. They came back. My mom got married, and everything went fine. And we know so much, but not a lot about this story. And so I was so amazed. A couple of years ago, I was doing some indexing, and I found this document. It was all the boats that have arrived in that year in Sao Paulo do Brazil, and lo and behold, there was the document of immigration from my grandparents with the photographs of the whole family and their job and everything, all in Brazil and Brasileiro. And I was like, oh my gosh, here they are. And I just shared it with everyone, because just to see something that they say, it's true, this really happened, and I've never been to Brazil. And it was like, wow, it's a piece of history. And it makes that connection so much stronger. And so you're like, hey, here we go, I know I care about this. And so that's why I think your work is so important, because not only you are preparing for all the medical documents and belongings, but also you're making that concept of a strong family to be carried forward to the next generation. So this person mattered, they done something with their life, and their ancestors did. So what a beautiful thing to put it all together, to give them this privilege to be interviewed, to feel important, and maybe there'll be some family secrets that might even come out. You never know.
That's true. I actually, there was a man that we went through the guardian's gift process, and he had stage 4 cancer, and he passed away. But at his funeral, and at the end afterwards, his children, some of his children were a little estranged. They not completely, they did communicate some, but they opened up the guardian's gift book and they looked at it and they said, oh my gosh, we did not know this about our dad. We did not know some of the things he did in college. We didn't know his story at all. And so they just were so amazed at the stories that I collected and presented to them and to the funeral home and to the pastor to preach his funeral. So they said, you knew stuff about our dad we never knew. And I'm like, I asked,
That's the thing with children. They never ask their parents, oh, you're too old, you don't understand anything. Parents are always so bad, until you become older. Then you realize your parents actually were quite wise. They had so much wisdom there that, now you want to retrieve. And it's so true. There is so much. I remember sending you this link of this South Dakota governor from, I don't know when it was. She was doing a conference in Florida. And skipping the political part, I'm not going to be involved. But she was so beautiful because she mentioned that when her father, who was a farmer, died, they had a huge farm with all the crops to take care of, and nobody had a clue what to do. And several months later, she went to his truck where traditionally you keep everything important, and she found like 12 little audio cassettes where he had recorded tons and tons of solutions, ideas, and things about the seeds and the price of the seed and the season and everything. It was like a godsend for them, Yeah. And so that really fills that gap with lack of communication. So maybe the message for today will be, first of all, make your will. Second, think about the family. When they are left and you are dead, maybe they want to know if you wanted to donate your organs. What things would people want to know when it's too late? What do they regret as a final thing before we close?
Yes.
What do you think?
I think people regret not having conversation. I think the key is to actually begin the conversation. I know it's a difficult conversation to start. And so that's why I recommend a professional person to help guide the process. But, sit down with your family and actually open up and talk about start with what it is you want for the end of your life, how you want it to look. Begin making those arrangements. But you can't do any of that without having communication. You're exactly right. You have to talk about these things, and you have to plan them out. I mean, imagine if this person that you're telling this story about had known before her father died about the crops and the seeds and where those documents or that information was, as opposed to having to find it later in his truck. That's an interesting story. But to have it in a book, to have it in a story-bound way that makes sense, all the passwords and PIN numbers and all the financial documents and information and all the legal documents, it gets overwhelming, as where we started. It is overwhelming, but there is a process to get through it.
That is beautiful. Thank you, Judy. That was so enlightening, and I'm so glad that we had this chat. And thank you for contacting me to ask to come to my podcast, because I thought it was great. It was a great idea.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to add to your pearls of wisdom for the day?
I just want to encourage people, if you don't do anything else, have a conversation. There's somebody in your life that needs to share their story, that needs to share this information with you. Have that conversation. And if anything, if you have trouble or you're overwhelmed or you feel like procrastinating, I'll do it tomorrow, give me a call. You can contact me or friends, and she'll let you know how to get in touch with me. I've got Facebook. I'm on the internet. I would love to chat with you. Give me a call.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Of course, we are both very much experts in procrastination, so don't procrastinate doing this. Think about your mental wellness is very important. And also when people become older, if they get dementia, they might remember very, very old episodes, but not the new ones. Mm-hmm. Or they might not be able to explain if they want to be kept alive artificially with all these machines. And I, for example, I always say to my children, to people who know me very well, they say, well, if an accident happens and I become a vegetable, I'm in coma, I'm intubated, please turn off a machine, take off the tubes. I do not want to live like that for even once a week. When you see that there is no way, it's not really sure, and I'm going to be there to waste away, just turn off a machine. If a doctor says no, just turn it off when we're not looking, because I will come back to you as a ghost. I'll haunt you. So I don't want to live. I'm super active. So this is one of the things. I'm only 56, but I want to make sure that people respect my will.
Yes.
And so when I die, I want very happy music and people very happily dancing, because I'm going to be super happy. I'm sad for them. They're stuck in here, but I'm going to be so happy. Because the other world for me is a beautiful place, even better than the background I have today with all the waves and the sea is beautiful. So for me, I have no regrets, but I want them to be happy, and I want them to know what I wanted to have for my own death. And is, it could be painful, but most times we can avoid the pain without too much of a medicine and pipes and things that just keep you alive for another couple of months for no reason whatsoever. So that is one thing I would always ask in an interview. If something happened, would you like to try to save you? Do you want to be resuscitated? Some people don't want to be resuscitated.
Right.
Some people said, I have enough. And I remember a guy from dementia in the news last week. He was saying that he had forgotten everything, was non-talkative, non-verbal, and by one day he managed to talk and say, this pain is too much, I don't want it anymore. And so, it was so enlightening for the children to know this guy is in pain. He doesn't want to suffer.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting about what you're saying there, because if it's not written down somewhere, there becomes disputes in families. Families begin arguing about, well, no, that's not what should happen. And someone else will say, yes, it is what should happen. But if things are documented and written down clearly, there's no question about what the person wants or doesn't want. So there can be, I've just got through running a whole series of articles about famous people that had no will, and some that did have a will, what happened with that when there was controversy and dissension in the family. So it's important to really, really make clear. And just because you tell someone with words, if it's not written down, it's just their word against somebody else's.
Yes, and And the last thing we want is contention and more issues.
Yes, absolutely.
That will be so bad. So finishing on a very high note, thank you so much for all your contributions, for your lovely idea. Do you want to remind us your website again, in case I forget?
The actual school is actually called theguardiansgift.org, theguardiansgift.org. I also am on Facebook. It's Butler Counseling and Consulting. And I would love for people to join me there. There you can see all the posts that I've put up and read a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about. And it's there. It's there for them to partake.
It's there. So it's up to you guys. Thank you so much, Judy, for being with us. I'm so glad that we had such a chat. So I want to invite our audience to really make an effort to have this conversation, because it can literally save their mental well-being. So
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for this. I appreciate the opportunity.
So guys, thank you so much for being with me today. We had 31 minutes of amazing pieces of wonderful information from Judy Butler, a psychotherapist from North Carolina. If you like this episode, please click like and share this with your friends, and remember to write a review so that more people can talk about mental wellness, which is, as Judy knows, a very, very important thing. So thank you so much and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. You have listened to Create with Fran Sidney.